Good afternoon. My name is Solvita ZARINA, and I'm the moderator for the third panel of sensory perception and sonic immersions. We already have two exciting panels, but this should be the most exciting, of course. And welcome to this panel, and let's begin. First, I'd like to remind some organizational things. Each panelist has 20-minute time for the presentation, including 1 to 2 questions. And dear audience, please feel free to ask questions after each presentation. I will encourage you, and I will do this on behalf of our conference lead, Rasa. And now, I'm about to introduce our first speaker, Lauren RUIZ. Lauren is a research-based multimedia artist interrogating ecological contamination, institutional authority, and bioethics through speculative fiction-based installations, interactive performance, and digital works. Her interactive installations situate viewers in recognizable institutional spaces, affecting how they relate to the complex mechanisms of evolution, ecology, data, and identify relative to institutional power and personal embodiment. Lauren, the floor now is yours.
Wonderful. All right. First, I just want to thank all of the conference attendees and the committee. I'm really excited to be here. A lot of the panels have been wonderful so far, so hopefully mine is up to par. Okay, so I'm just going to share my screen so we can have some slides going. Okay, everyone can see my slides or slide?
Yeah, everything is perfect.
Great, awesome. Okay, so this presentation will unpack an ongoing series of work that interrogates the relationships between, I'm sorry. Let me start over, sorry. I'm a research-based multimedia artist whose work confronts the complex relationships between ethics, environmental practices, and both human and animal bodies in the context of anthropogenic climate change. This presentation will unpack an ongoing series of work that interrogates those relationships, as well as the effects of migration, labor, and the American mythos, which is often embedded with Judeo-Christian influence. This research began while examining the connections between common earthworms, which are an invasive species to North America, and the microplastic pollutants that have infiltrated the soil. I was thinking about agriculture, food production, the cycles of synthetics through the ecosystem, and how earthworms relate to these materials in the soil. As I begin, I want to highlight some key questions that stayed with me throughout this research process. What does it mean to be an invader or to be invasive? How does a subject's perception of nature influence their perspective on human and non-human labor? Is a synthetic material an invader? And lastly, when does one turn from an invader to a resource or source of labor? And now, while I continue, I'm going to play a video of my earthworm studies. There's no sound, so. I will begin with my investigation into the quiet, slow invader, Lumbricus terrestris, more commonly known as the nightcrawler. Nightcrawlers are one of the more common annelid varieties in the Northeast of the United States. They have light-responsive skin cells, are sensitive to vibration, have 2 hearts, can regenerate their lower half, can live up to 8 years, are hermaphroditic, and are an invasive species, only arriving in North America with the first wave of European settlers. They are of the anasic species, meaning they make vertical burrows, pushing to the surface of the ground to feed, and then bringing debris back down into the soil, churning, mixing it with the organic matter below. Although they are in fact an invasive species, they are never deemed as such. In common conversation, these annelids are often spoken about as part of a natural farming technique, organic, native, as if they belonged to or are one with the land. Their presence is revered in agricultural communities due to their ability to influence physical and biotic properties of soil by bioturbation and affect the density of other soil invertebrates and plant community composition. Citing research from the American Chemical Society, agricultural soils are among the most contaminated environmental compartments with plastic debris. It is estimated that the annual plastic input to land is about 4 to 23 times higher than the input to oceans. Micro and nanoplastics pass through earthworm bodies where no nutrients are gained, and the earthworm loses body mass. This leads to lower reproduction rate, increased mortality rate, less microbial growth, fewer variants of fungal and bacterial growth, and weaker soil. As found in Science Report's article, Microplastic Transport in Soil by Earthworms, quote, decomposition of organic material is generally much slower deeper in the soil, where microbial populations are much reduced. This would mean that microplastic, which is slow to turn over in the environment in the first place, may have an even longer persistence once it reaches greater depths in the soil profile. Microplastic could potentially also reach the groundwater after passage through the soil profile, where it may lead to undesirable effects akin to those already extensively documented in aquatic environments. Microplastic that arrives in the soil may be subject to further disintegration, leading to the production of nano-sized material, which could have different functional properties and pose different environmental risks. These findings fueled my interest in earthworm labor and how it is perceived or understood based on the results of that labor. How the earthworm continues to bring the micro and nanoplastics underground, consistently laboring, collecting debris, organic and inorganic alike, further mixing plastics in with soil castings, bacteria, plant matter, creating a mixture of a new nature. When considering what is understood as natural, it is important to contemplate the cycle of these artificial materials through the ecosystem, through waterways, animal bodies, filtration systems, and food sources. Nature, as it is explicated in Timothy Morton's Hyperobjects, aids in the contextualization of environmental systems. Nature is not untouched, pure, or devoid of human interference. Nature has evolved into a fluid mixture of natural and synthetic materials as artificial compounds cycle through ecological processes. Nuclear waste, plastic microbeads, and antibiotics have been woven into the fabric of nature and exist as a new adaptation of the sort. Nothing goes away. It cycles back into the foreground, into the frame. A new nature, engineered in part by the steady labor of the nightcrawler. This leads to questions of how this continued labor, one without regard for the effect on human or animal well-being, complicates the distinction between synthetic and organic in the same way that it complicates the idea of the invader or laborer, alien or resource. Go back to my slides. In late 2020, I partnered with Cornell Cooperative Extension of Suffolk County to gain a more in-depth understanding of soil health, the role of earthworms in local ecology, and the historical agricultural practices and belief systems that create the groundwork for industrial agriculture both locally and on a national scale. Through this partnership, I was able to get a closer look at the lens from which the industrial farmer views his crops, his land, and the encompassing environment. The foundations of this relationship were often rooted in Western theology, beliefs that position man not only against nature, but create a scenario in which man is bequeathed with mastering and harnessing nature for his own benefit. In my many conversations with soil specialist Deborah Aller, she shared how the farmers she spoke to had very specific ideas about agricultural practices, including the belief that the land is meant to nurture the body, the human body in particular, and that the earth is a fertile vessel for our continual use to no end. In his text, Eco-Criticism, Greg Gerard inquires about the societal norms or institutions that can be placed at the center of the Anthropocene debate, and references historian Lynn White Jr., who makes a claim that human perception of the natural world can be understood through popular Western beliefs and the spread of Judeo-Christianity. Gerard poses that, quote, Christianity, in absolute contrast to ancient paganism and Asia's religions, except perhaps Zoroastrianism, not only establish a dualism of man and nature, but also insist that it is God's will that man exploit nature for his proper ends, and concludes that we shall continue to have worsening ecological crises until we reject the Christian axiom that nature has no reason for existence save to serve man, end quote. The first uses of wilderness were biblical. When Adam and Eve were driven from the Garden of Eden, the world they entered was a wilderness that only their labor and pain could redeem. It is a view of nature that signifies unknown, untamed power, a power at odds with the force of man, a power that in the end is all-knowing and can fix man-made crises. Early colonists tamed the American wilderness through God and farming, overcoming the wild, domesticated, and mastering the unbridled landscape. The gift lay bare, the earth, fertile, abundant, docile landscape, the ground to take, harness, use, sow, and come back and claim bounty. Quote, as a natural maternal presence, the land could be the object of puerile but essential harmless, regressive fantasies. Referencing biblical texts, Judges 18:10 states, when you invade, you'll meet a carefree people living in a spacious territory. God has given it into your control. It's a place that lacks nothing on this earth, end quote. This verse was critical in the investigation of this perception and the disconnects between a subject and the land, as well as a subject and the quote unquote other in the land. As God-fearing Europeans traveled westward across the Atlantic with earthworms in tow, they believed that their promised land, through laboring, tilling, and harnessing the soil, would be divinely their property. These original invaders created their own origin story. Through this narrative of divine inheritance, the act of labor unto the earth, the land became their own. The idyllic pastoral landscape, a promised land of fertile soil and running waters, inspired the mythos of American identity through the 19th and 20th century, especially as a new wave of immigrants were traveling to the American shores. The white settlers, now deeming themselves as native, created a wave of patriotism and nationalism from which to categorize and separate themselves from new immigrants to the States. This strict sense of Americanism led to systemic assimilation of immigrants who became a major source of labor in both rural farmland and industrial cities. This system of assimilation ignited generational erasure of their identity. This link to labor, ecology, and religious doctrine prompt questions around the connotation of the migrant based on the ground rules set upon the American landscape by the original invaders, and now self-proclaimed native people of America. Although this argument can be expanded to include the disastrous effects on indigenous peoples, my focus is currently on this idea of inherited land and faux nativeness, as it conflicts with the beliefs of white European settlers and their regard for immigrants, which leads to the Americanization of both human and non-human subjects. In this planned generational erasure of otherness, the immigrant is exposed to a violent but slow invasion. Who is the invader here? How do we decide who belongs on the land and who is a threat? This idea of the alien or the foreigner felt by white European colonists is explored through Alan Trachtenberg's text, Shades of Hiawatha. Quote, one body, one heartbeat. This traditional metaphor for corporate nationality construed the nation as an organic entity of assimilated difference. The body absorbs and converts heterogeneity into homogeneity. A biological figure of the unitary body underlay the popular chemical metaphor of conversion, the melting pot that blends difference into sameness and produces an amalgam, a composite, an organic aggregate. The nutrient parts lose their distinctiveness when they merge with the whole, coloring its character but not altering its wholeness and its one heartbeat. Anything irreducibly alien, indigestible, and unassimilable threatened the health of the body with pollution, contamination, or worse, mongrelization, end quote. Indigestible, unassimilable, threatening to the health of the body. What is the body that is being referred to? I cannot help but draw parallels to the body as the earth and the common practice of monoculturing performed regularly by industrial farmers across the United States. It is the cultivation of a single crop in a given area, and it is commonplace here in Long Island, New York, a practice that the soil specialist I worked with at CCE is trying to advise farmers against. The act of monoculturing, curating and controlling the claimed earth leads to great bouts of desertification and unhealthy soil, because once the single crop is harvested, the soil lay bare and unutilized for an extended period of time. The soil no longer receives the nutrients it needs for the microbes, plants, fungi, and earthworms to feed. When these organisms die, there is nothing holding the soil together. No microbiome where nutrients, life, and water can reside. No place where carbon, pesticides, and microplastics can be held and kept from escaping into the air or the water supply. The soil becomes dirt, infertile, dry, desertified. Monoculturing illustrates a masterful image of pastoral dominance, a farmer harnessing the land, laboring, tilling the soil to serve his needs. The practice illuminates the tension between where control, dominance, and power lie between the farmer and the land. As I continue to wrestle with the concepts at play in this project, because there are many, I have honed in on the connections between labor, Americanization, and the idea of the invader on unknown land. I kept thinking about the varying definitions of the words invader, foreigner, alien, inheritance, Americanness, erasure, monoculture. Throughout this process, I constantly refer back to Darwin's The Formation of Vegetable Mold Through the Action of Worms, as well as Darwin's Worms, where Adam Phillips suggests that Darwin may have been commenting on the disparate class divide of the time, noting that, quote, Darwin perhaps intimates that our political and theological hierarchies themselves, that always double each other, are just another powerful weapon in the war of nature, end quote. Darwin was able to write about earthworms later in life as an exploration of mortality, death, and his fascination with labor, digestion, and slow transformative power. Quote, Darwin wanted to tell the story of this marginalized, indeed buried mass of creatures, and he wanted to tell it in terms of their labor, end quote. So this series of photographs focuses on the idea of American identity through the lens of the pastoral American landscape, an increased emphasis of Americanization in the 19th and 20th century. I used conventions of early photographic portraiture to comment on the inherited erasure of identity and the assimilated image of the immigrant, the invader as both the white European and the immigrant, and the formation of faux native identity. This project sits very close to me, which is a new aspect to my work. I'm just starting to mine it. It's been a challenge to unpack all these histories that intermingle in such a messy way, but also at the same time, such a seamless way. And I hope to extend this series with more photographs that confront the idea of the invader or the non-native human or animal body through the lens of the American mythos. The following images are from a multimedia installation that was on exhibition at the Southampton Art Center in spring of 2021. So these series of works are all being birthed from the research that I'm still continuing to do. This project, titled Zone of Loss, took the research from Cornell and the lack of agency bequeathed to land, annelids, and the microbiomes that allow for plants to grow and thus human survival, and forced subjects to confront and adjust their movement around the work. A monument to the subterranean, the work restores authority to geologic Earth as it dictates a subject's movement through space, allowing for a confrontation of the land beneath and around them. An understanding of land as a passive object to be bought, stolen, shifted, and conquered was challenged. The worms were also given agency through a sound piece in the installation. The sonic element was a 5-point surround system that featured the recorded sounds of earthworms as they moved through the soil. The sound, taken from recordings of burrowing earthworms and mixed with inaudible sound that could be felt because it was below 25 hertz, created an experiential deceleration of time, alluding to the slow, quiet decay and transformation that occurs within the soil, questioning how non-humans experience the tactility of the underground and the essential life-sustaining labor that often goes unnoticed and ignored. The sound was disarming, threatening, drawing attention to the subterranean lives that transform the ground beneath us slowly but constantly. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I also would like to say, and I hope my audience will have questions. Yeah. Yeah, maybe Ricardo del Fara, will you make a question or it was simply a recognition?
No, it was simply a recognition. I think Kat Blair was having a question.
Yeah, and how about Case?
Yeah, hi. Thanks for the talk. It was really interesting. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about that last piece that you showed, and kind of like could you tell us more about that structure of dirt and what that was incorporating? I would love to hear more about that.
Sure. Yes. So from working with the specialists at Cornell Cooperative, I gained a lot of insight on soil layers and the zones of soil. And I probably should have mentioned the zone of loss actually refers to the E horizon in soil. And that's where a lot of the nutrients are lost. So if there aren't organic matter present or microbiomes present, that is where water and pesticides and carbon can just leach right into groundwater. So that's why it was called the zone of loss. Also loss for this idea of lost populations or lost identity. But the structure was meant to represent kind of a coring of Earth with the grass on top. And it was made of soil congregated, and it kind of, the grass died throughout the process of the exhibition because it didn't receive the nutrients and light and water that it needed. And then the sound element, which I can't play because of it's inaudible on most speakers, it was very, you could feel it in your body. It was more vibrational. So it was more experiential, which I loved because it created kind of this separation or like this fluidity through space and then your body, which I thought maybe that's how it would feel to be underground because there's no air, it's dense, there's everything around you, so it's very tactile. So I was trying to get at that in, a space above ground with air and, moving bodies. Thank you for the question.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. And we have one more comment and question. Billy Rebel asks, how did you record the sounds of the earthworms, and also how was this low frequency played in the gallery?
So I worked with a sound technician who's he's a grad student at Stony Brook University, and he figured out this type of speakers of how to play that sound in the gallery. So we had it was a 8.1 surround system in the gallery. And I always get this question about how I recorded the earthworm sounds. I have an earthworm farm in my basement, and I used a really sensitive microphone, and I buried the mic in the soil and had that hooked up to my laptop with my headphones and just waited for a while. and just listen to them move. And it's really interesting because it's not necessarily their sound, it's the sound of their body moving against something else. So it's really just a sound recording of their mark making through space or through soil.
Okay, thank you, Lauren.
Thank you.
Yeah, it was really interesting, especially this last project. I think you're on the right track.
Thank you.
But,
yeah, the research kind of went all over the place. It was like a wild goose chase through what I'm doing, as it usually is with any form of art making. But yeah, I'm really happy with the last work too. So thank you for the kind words.
Yeah, thank you again. And now please welcome our next team, and speaker will obviously be Stephanie Rotenberg. And Stephanie's interdisciplinary art draws from digital culture, science, and economics to explore relationships between human design systems and biological ecosystems. She has exhibited internationally, and her work is in the collection of the Whitney Museum of American Art and has been widely reviewed, including Art Forum, ArtNet, Brooklyn Rail, and others. And other team member, Susan Thorpe, is currently a member of the Society of Fellows and a Mellon Teaching Fellow at Columbia University. And now, Stephanie, the floor is yours.
Oh, I just was wondering, thank you. Was there more to the bio with Suzanne on there?
It's fine, let's move on.
Okay.
Time.
Okay. So hello, I'm Stephanie Rothenberg, and this is Suzanne Thorpe, and I am going to switch the screen. I'll do the screen share. Can everybody see that okay?
Yes.
Okay.
Yay.
Okay, good. We want to thank everybody for being here, for attending on whether it's your daytime or evening, and we're really excited about this conference. We're going to start by just quickly introducing ourselves. Let's jump over here. I'm an interdisciplinary artist, and I work across new technologies, economics, and science. I use a variety of platforms, including performance, installation, and network-based media to create what I call expanded cartographies. So mapping and making visible intersections between the biopolitical and the geographical. I'm interested in showing the relationships and vulnerabilities between human design systems and biological ecosystems. And in recent works, I've speculated on what it might look like if we put non-humans in the so-called driver's seat of future development. And these ideas of development and design from a more inclusive, non-anthropocentric model are what led me to the current collaborative project with Suzanne.
And I'm Suzanne Thorpe. I'm an artist scholar whose research intersects electronic music, feminist, and ecological theory. I weave together traditional and creative research methods to forefront music-making sites as social and political frameworks, and really dig into their potential animations of more than human dynamics. In my work, I often adopt more than human listening systems to invite listeners to imagine multi-species perception. And Stephanie is going to summarize our current project for you.
Yes, so the project we're presenting is titled Tending Ostradae, Serenades for Settling, and it's a work in progress. It's a speculative operetta, so it's somewhere between an opera and a musical, and it'll take the form of an immersive multimedia sound installation that examines the impact of anthropogenic induced sound, otherwise known as noise pollution, on marine life. Recent studies have shown that in addition to overfishing and pollution from runoff and waste dumping, sound from human activity can have an extremely detrimental impact on marine habitats and ecosystems. So much of this research into oceanic noise pollution has focused on larger and more visible marine animals, such as whales. So we've centered the piece on the listening body of the heroic oyster. And we say heroic oyster, heroic basically because the oyster is often overlooked, but a very vital member of our ecosystem that has a rich ecological and economic history. It's a water filter, it's a sea level mitigator, and a novel food source. So through our research with scientists, we've learned that oysters can actually sense sound, like earthworms, and that they use this ability to determine their habitats for settlement and reproduction. So we're going to show a short 2.5 minute video that is kind of the beginning of this work in progress, and it uses sounds that are taken from oyster reefs, and Suzanne can explain a little bit more of that, but I'll just jump in and play the video. I'm going to try to play it from the PowerPoint, so if it's really bad, let me know.
Also, I'll put a link to the video in the chat for folks if it's super choppy.
I guess just shout out if it's not working well. So we're going to start with a little bit of backstory. In 2019, I had a fellowship at Bowdoin College, which is located in the United States on the southern coast of Maine. And as you can see here from this image, the Gulf of Maine, which is warming faster than 99% of the world's oceans, has really drastically affected the both the ecological environment, but as well as the economics of the area. And at the college, I had a bioart lab that enabled me to work with faculty and students in the marine science department. And I began studying the environmental impact of climate change on this coastal area, learning about invasive species and one particular creature well known in the area, the oyster. So working with students and faculty, I was able to conduct experiments to better understand what I consider this magical organism. As mentioned, oysters are water filters. So as you can see from this image, they could filter up to 50 gallons, 190 liters of water per day. And they are also sea level mitigators. And through their reproduction and the layering of their shells, they build these natural seawalls that are critical, especially now to stop coastline erosion. And through this research, I started to develop a project called Aquadesia, which is an environmental science fiction that speculates on a new breed of oyster that can transform human sentience by drinking Aquadesia water that the oysters produce. So the project plays on the libidinal myth of the oyster as an aphrodisiac, but rather than just inducing a mere sexual energy in humans, it's a transformation of becoming oyster. And while I was working on this project and knowing Suzanne's amazing sound work, I asked her if she would collaborate with me and to create an audio score for the project, which showed at ISEA 2020 Montreal. And this led to our current collaboration. And through this notion of becoming oyster, we began to imagine how we could create immersive listening environments that would situate the listener.
So this idea of becoming oyster became less of a speculation and more of a probable bridge as we discovered more about the listening oyster. When we collaborated, that we realized that oysters listens to their environment to determine where to settle. Specifically, research conducted at North Carolina State University's Department of Marine, Earth, and Atmospheric Sciences found that oysters know suitable settlement habitats through a distinction of sound signatures in underwater soundscapes. We use the term listen in this case in its broadest sense to encompass the oyster's reception of stimuli from water and substrate-borne vibrations. So it's picking up both the waterborne sounds and the sounds borne through the waterbed floor. Bivalve mollusks don't sense a sound wave's pressure per se like we do in our ears, but rather perceive the particle component of a sound wave. They do this through their epidermal cells, that's one site, as well as internal staticist receptor systems, which they use for balance and orientation, and also through a third spot in their abdominal sense organ, a mechosensory receptor that's highly sensitive to mechanical waterborne vibrations. So in a manner of speaking, the oyster becomes sound, as summarized by researchers at the University of Bordeaux, who observes that, quote, in water breathers, sound reaches sense organ directly since their body has more or less the same density as the water. Their sense organ, along with the rest of the body, moves with the sound, unquote. This sensitivity, coupled with the fact that the acoustic signals travel more rapidly than visual and chemical stimuli in water, mean that the bivalve mollusks are deep listeners of the sea, and their well-being is crucially tied to this ability. For instance, after the larvae develop their staticist structures, they seek to settle in habitats with a particular ambient sound quality, preferring soundscapes that include higher frequencies in the 1 to 2 kilohertz range, as opposed to lower frequency settlings. This is because it's been found that oysters are most sensitive to frequencies in the 10 to 200 hertz range. So some of that is subsonic, which Lauren was just talking about right before that, below that 20 hertz floor that humans can hear. And then slightly above that in the more friendly bass ranges that we all appreciate, or at least humans do, and close their valves in response to this range. Their valves would reopen during or after sound stimuli, but would close again at the next onset of low frequency sine tones that were emitted within these experiments. So this is summarized a little bit more clearly in this next slide, this slide here, where it shows that the percentage of oysters responding to sound pressure levels shows a marked increase with line D, which is the noise level produced by a cargo boat 10 meters away, right? So here we significantly have some demonstration of really what boats have to do with it. And so I'll hand it over to Stephanie to expand on that more.
So as we've been mentioning, and you can see in this image, right, anthropogenic noise is a stressor for marine animals. And we see noise from vessels, active sonar, synthetic sounds, which are artificial tones and white noise, and acoustic deterrent devices, as well as noise that's from energy and construction infrastructure and seismic surveys. And what's interesting about sound noise pollution is compared with other stressors that are persistent in the environment, such as carbon dioxide emitted to the atmosphere or persistent pollutants that are delivered to marine ecosystems. With anthropogenic noise, you have a point source pollutant. So the effects will decline as soon as the sources are removed. And speaking about boats, we forgot to mention I'm located in Buffalo, New York, which is considered Western New York, and Suzanne is between New York City at Columbia and a little more upstate in the Hudson area. And both of us have spent a lot of time in New York City. And we are doing some initial research into New York City's harbors. And one of the main reasons, is because New York was the epicenter of oyster harvesting. And in the 17th century, it held half of the world's oysters. And then due to industrialization, over-harvesting, all the dredging and pollution, that by the 1920s, they were nearly extinct. So there's a real initiative now, the Billion Oysters Project, and a lot of other research to bring back the oysters of New York Harbor. So we've been working with some of those organizations, and also just want to show you this image of some of the data that we'll be using, which is real-time data from local marine traffic. And here you can see the East Coast of the Atlantic, and then zooming in more on New York Harbor. We'll also be using water monitoring systems. Here you see from the US Geological Survey that shows temperature and pH balance. And this data will serve as generative parameters in creating both the sound and visual content.
We'll also be using our multi-channel sound system to realize what are known as sound channel convergence zones, which are will simulate how sound behaves in different depths of water as it intersects with what is known as the thermocline, which is the transition layer between deep and surface water. This thermocline is also influenced by temperature and salinity, so we can start to see how all of these elements come together to influence how sound actually behaves within these environments. We will particularly focus on the phenomena of high sound levels in the shallower sound channels where oysters seek to settle, considering correlations between the depths that they settle at and the aquatic noise propagation.
And in creating part of this sculptural installation, we're working on developing these, quote, listening oysters, and starting with 3D printed oyster forms that will be embedded with hydrophones into their shells, and they'll be able to pick up local sounds in the tank and the surrounding environment. And then their responses will be mapped to media generation as well.
So in its entirety, what this project will do, it will realize waves of acoustic phenomena that situates participants as listening body and psychophysio-site of knowledge. It will invite listeners to enter into a more than human, aquatic-oriented cosplay of somatically entangled environmental navigator within the vibratory flow of sounds. It will ask participants to attend to their own perception of interoceptive resonances amid their own flows. It will prompt them to consider their felt sense of murmurs and palpitations and how they contribute to or detract from their own understandings of settlement and well-being, as well as the creatures they're embedded with.
And here's some of our sources.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your nice teamwork, and very sorry for short introduction about Susan. I simply was not able to guess, and I decided, well, you did this job together, but speaker will be Stephanie. Very sorry for that, but now I'm waiting for questions from our audience. Yeah. Case Blair says thank you for super interesting project in chat, and thank you for presenting. Anything else? Oh, yeah, we have a question from Michelle. First of all, love this talk and the sound work. My question is, can you explain how the 3D printer biosensor oyster will translate to the sense perception of an live oyster?
Sure. Do you want to?
Yeah, so, what we'll be doing is basically molding a hydrophone to be the body of the oyster, right? So this is going to, the 3D printed component will be its outside shell, and then we'll make a more, a softer component that will be the inside, but embedded in that side will be a hydrophone. And that will be embedded in its own tank, right? Like it will be living in its own tank. And so that will be picking up the sound, its local sound, right? And that in turn will be incorporated into this real-time generative composition component, right? That all of us listeners will be within. So, it's going to be multiple sources, right, of impact of sounds that will be informing the ambient soundscape that will be created in real time. Michelle, does that get at the heart of your question, I hope?
And the oyster,
Great.
I mean, also there might be some soft robotics involved in terms of its like internal organs. So
right. So, and that can be mapped also. So I talked about the opening and closure, right, of the valve system. Okay. So in that, they've determined that has meaning. They don't know what the meaning is, right? Like we can only become oysters so much. But we can demonstrate, right, that is happening and having an effect in some form or fashion. So, and this will also make the participant somewhat responsible, right, for what's going on in the environment, in real time. So we intend to leverage that particular dynamic in this environment.
Thank you, Susan. And we have one more question for one of the presenters, Kate. Kate, please, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thanks for the talk. It was really fascinating. My question is, and maybe I just misunderstood this, but you were talking about the musical operetta at the very beginning, and I was wondering if that was is that the complete project, that is the video that we saw some of, or is it ongoing? Sorry, I'm very curious.
Yeah, so it's ongoing. So we're really experimenting with this idea of operetta and mapping it onto this installation idea and having the operetta be realized in different instantiations within the installation. Okay, so it's going to be layered. would like to be able to have live performed components. But then there's also aspects, or let's say, you know, arias, right? Or some recitatives that might be performed in situ, right? As kind of like an installation aspect. So we're really stretching and pulling around this idea of operetta to expanding on this idea of operetta to kind of push into other realms of, or other forms. So
I'll just mention really quickly that one image that we pulled up that showed the life cycle that kind of helps drive, right, the different stages of the life cycle in terms of the opera and all, you know, the different kind of life cycle of the opera and the, you know.
Right. So that's kind of our narrative form.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And now I would like to welcome our next speaker, Catherine Blair. Kate, you disappeared all of a sudden. I hope you will be back.
I'm here. I'm just changing my, changing so I can stand.
Okay. Everything is good.
Yes, I'm good to go. I just wanted to stand up and not have my screen moving weirdly while I was doing that. Can everyone, am I audible?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Okay, great. I can just start. Fabulous. Sorry. I thought I was going to have an introduction, so that's.
Oh, I was, yes.
No, that's okay.
Yes, you'll have, of course, you'll have your introduction. Very sorry. I simply misunderstood what is going on.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to stand up. So now I am standing and ready to go.
Yeah. And now let me introduce Catherine. She's a PhD candidate in the Computational Media Design program at the University of Calgary. Her work provides context in which people can explore the way our societies use algorithmic decision-making. Catherine also creates wearable pieces exploring the relationship between the body and technology. She's been involved in the Calgary-based tech couture fashion show, Make Fashion, since 2013 and has shown her work in Alberta, British Columbia, China, United States, and Ireland. Please, Kate.
Great. Thank you very much. Okay, I'm just going to share my presentation. There we go. Is that working okay? Can we see? Oh, and I'm going to make sure that I have. I am sharing sound and optimizing for video clips. One moment here. There we go. Okay, I am ready to go now. Fantastic. So thank you so much for having me. I'm super happy to be here. I've been to this conference a couple times in person and yeah, extremely happy to see everyone. So my name's Kath Blair, and I'm going to be presenting on Algorithmic Rituals, which is about embodied explorations of algorithmic decision making. And this work is done with my supervisors, Peel Hansen and Laura Olberg. And I also wanted to mention, I'm sorry if this presentation is a little bit off theme. I was a little bit earlier and I was going to be at 6 a.m. So thankfully or helpfully, Rasa moved me a little bit later. So I'm not as much in the theme as everyone else. And I'm sorry, I've lost the video, so I can't actually see anybody. So if you need to get my attention, chat is probably the best way. And I'll see if I can figure that out. Okay. First I wanted to do a land acknowledgement. So I'd like to take this opportunity to acknowledge the traditional territories of the people of the Treaty 7 region in southern Alberta, which includes the Blackfoot Confederacy, comprising the Siksika, Piikani, and Kainai First Nations, as well as the Tsuut'ina First Nation and the Stoney Nakoda, which includes the Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Wesley First Nations. The city of Calgary is also home to the Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3. And I really want to do that because it's just about the National Day of Truth and Reconciliation. So I'm here to talk about algorithmic rituals. This is a project that I completed this summer, and it's a interactive participatory piece in which people use movement to explore how our societies use algorithms. So in this, how we're kind of using rituals, or how I'm thinking of rituals, which was one of the seeds of this idea, is thinking about like, how does technology use feel when it's recontextualized as a ritual? And so both from the perspectives of rituals as our habitual behavior and how does that interact with other people, as well as rituals as a way to kind of cope with the unfathomable and as a prescribed series of things to do. So all of those senses of ritual were really important for me while I was kind of putting together this project. And the kind of goal of this participation is to reflect on our technology use habits and how potentially algorithmic systems impact that. Great. So I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of the background before I move on to giving more detail about the project itself. So in my research in the computational media design program, kind of had to decide I was going to call this, the situation that I'm looking at, computational ontologies, which is basically when computer systems and their analysis of reality can become more important to decision making than the actual, like, kind of our lived reality out in the non-computer world. So when social systems rely on algorithms to guide decisions about people, that system's representation of reality can become more influential than our multifaceted human reality. And this situation can become problematic when the use of these systems undermine the responsiveness or inclusivity of public decision making, or when the results of decisions make, introduce, or perpetuate inequality. So there's many examples of this. One of them is a system to determine like which teachers should be hired and which should be fired. So in that case, the school system would be the map reader. There would be a corporation that makes that system that the school board has contracted. Then that system would like analyze students' test scores, as well as kind of written feedback, and then decide. So that's the data that they're using, and then decide kind of what happens to the teachers. So in this case, that's the public. And one of the problems with a system like that is that it can be manipulated. So teachers can try to kind of inflate students' test scores. And then if the next teacher doesn't also try to inflate students' test scores, then they get fired. So that's just kind of a direct example. So some of the pieces that I was using as reference or thinking about a lot while I was putting algorithmic rituals specifically together include Internet Aerobics. So this is by Liat Verdugo. And this is kind of like a workout routine that you do with like Ethernet cables. So thinking about how is the internet put together, and you know, what is your interaction with the internet? And it's very nostalgically staged. So this was done both as an in-person experience as well as a video. And one of the things that I really thought about working in algorithmic rituals from this project is the use of nostalgia and character. And I was thinking really hard about like, should the work be earnest in tone, or should it be kind of like funny? Should I be aiming to be funny? Should I be a character while I'm working, while I'm kind of leading people through algorithmic rituals, or should I be me? And so that's kind of what I'm thinking about looking at Internet Aerobics. I was also thinking a lot about Jean van Heeswijk's work. So this is Public Faculty number 13, and Public Faculty is kind of a project where Jean van Heeswijk and like the different cities that she works in and organizations are kind of like prompting social conversations with members of the public about like specific issues for the area. So they're kind of meant to provide an open space for considering those issues. And those might impact people's lives, but they might not regularly reflect on them. And so in thinking about Jean van Heeswijk's work, I was really thinking about what is the role of conversation in this project? Do we need to have some level of conversation, or, you know, is the movement all that we need to do? And then another piece of work that was really influential was this work on performance generating systems that Peel Hansen has published on and done a lot of work in. So this is Christopher House performing a project called Blurry. And it's an exploration of ways to score, which is like note down, a performance generating system. And so this is one of those systems in action, a photo of that. And so I was thinking about how can I adapt those scores as kind of thinking about an algorithm for movement. How can I adapt that to use by people who aren't experts as, professional dancers are? And then one thing that I'm kind of thinking about a lot in all these works, and I'll talk about the next one as well. So this is Dr. Pratim Gupta's work called Flocking Stories. And he does a lot of work both with people being able to influence all of the kind of flocking visualization that you're seeing. So I think this one was largely sensor-based. This is at the BAM Center. And then they also often have like stories, and sometimes the stories control how the birds flock together. And there's one installation version of this where like people just edit the code, the public edits the code. And so in all of these works, the kind of three that I've talked about before this, as well as this one, the idea of kind of the public having this active role in what they're doing is vital. So those are things that I'm kind of taking forward. It also builds upon my previous work. So in my MFA, I have made interactive, this was interactive logic puzzles that were kind of presented on magnetic boards and kind of like told stories about animal characters influenced by or impacted by algorithmic decisions. And this was kind of riffing off Lewis Carroll and Lewis Carroll's logic problems. And then I've done that a few times, bringing it into a puzzle piece context in a kind of more active session where I was facilitating directly. And one thing that I really noticed was that people really struggled with doing the logic puzzles, even though the logic puzzles weren't super difficult, just because it's such a different way of thinking. And not because they weren't in any way unable to do the puzzles. It was really just the barrier of not being practiced thinking this way. So in my PhD research, I'm working through 3 installations on this topic, and this is the first one, Algorithmic Rituals. I'm then conducting interviews with people who've participated, analyzing the data, and then using that to create provocations for ongoing installations. And this kind of part of this process is really iterative, and I will definitely be going back and forth between creating the art, having questions to ask in the analysis, and then kind of coming up with things that really provoke more art making, even though they might not directly lead to the art making. So it's not going to be like people suggest something and then I implement that, because these are 3 different installations, but more of a process of feeding between the 2. And then at the end, I'm hoping to have a final installation that kind of is the sort of culmination of all of that work. And then I'll be publishing presenting on that and trying to develop some best practices about how can we engage people actively with these topics. So this is Algorithmic Rituals. I hope the sound works. And I'm gonna turn the volume down quite a bit. So I'll just show you quickly kind of what we did. This is a demo video that we made. It wasn't one of the actual sessions. Thanks so much for joining me. So I did a little intro first, then we had a conversation about kind of what are your technology habits? How do you, encounter algorithms in your life? Then we went through this flowchart, which I'll talk about in more detail in just a moment, to choose a movement prompt. And then when we had done that, we started making our motions. You can see me making my motion, and here we are just about to get started. So here we go. Here's everybody doing their own motions that was based on that prompt that they chose by going through the flowchart. And they got to decide how abstract or how literal the motion should be. And they really had kind of complete freedom to do whatever they wanted with the motions. And then after we had done that first round, which was about 2 to 3 minutes long, I got them to take a look at this decision chart, which I'll also show in more detail later on. So this is kind of like a rule set for deciding how do you relate your movement to others. And once we had taken a look at that, we did a second session where people were just using the same music by which and then we kind of all did it together. So people would sort of like take different steps of everybody else's motion and start incorporating it into their own. So you can see like this person here had like a moment where they were like, oh, putting their hands up like this person. And then in the actual sessions in this demo, we didn't do it multiple times, but in the actual sessions, we did that 2 times just so that you could like have a chance to kind of get somewhat comfortable with that. So this is the flowchart that people used to really make those decisions and to figure out which prompt they would use. And I kind of put together this flowchart thinking about what algorithms might they be regularly encountering. And I really wanted it to look a little bit weird and messy and like a web because I think that reflects these systems pretty well. And also this process of going through this flowchart was supposed to kind of feel a little bit like you were being forced to make choices that didn't necessarily reflect your reality. I mean, it was fine if people wanted to lie. I had no problem with that. But that level of somewhat discomfort or somewhat being like, wait, what do I feel about that? Or I feel something totally else about that, and there's no room for it in this algorithm to choose a movement prompt was kind of one of the things I was really interested in. So yeah, and then that led to their movement prompt that they did. And so they got to decide kind of what that was completely on their own. And I just started doing my own and then they could join in. And then we did that for a few minutes. And then we added, and then we had a brief conversation about how that felt. And then we added this rule set of how do you make change your movements based on somebody else's movements. And so I was trying to use prompts on the if statement. You picked like what was the most important if statement to you. And then you picked, and then based on that, you had your then movement or then statement. And then you had a reference, so who were you relating to? And when we did the actual sessions, I had shared my screen, so we all had the same like layout of people, but everyone would be referring to a different person in any case. And people were totally able to decide what like dialogue meant or what glitches meant or what coupling meant. That was totally up to them. And then we kind of did it together. And during piloting, I really found that like that was challenging and people were really focused on how to do that. So we did it twice just to kind of make sure that people could get a feel for it. And so through that, I was really hoping that people would have some time to kind of both reflect on what are their relationships with different types of algorithms on a personal level, and also how does that or how can that impact each other? And also kind of think through it as creating this set of steps that you're going to follow really repetitively, and think about it as, and then you have another set of steps that you have to follow to relate it to each other. So kind of like several layers of somewhat arbitrary decision-making steps. And so the process for this, of course, like involved brainstorming. When I am creating these 3 installations, I'm really thinking about creation as a really important part of them. And I really had to adapt a lot to COVID-19. I also wanted to mention that I did work with a cultural reader to kind of like try to make the session as accessible as possible, especially given that it's like movement. People might not all be able to do that. And I'm sorry, I'm going to quickly proceed through these so that I don't put us too much behind. But I am doing some interviews with visitors and I've just started the analysis process. So as I'm working on that, I'm going to then be kind of feeding that back into the next installations, the next 2 installations that I'm creating, which I have kind of ideas for. But as I develop them, I'm kind of looking at what provocations are coming up in the data. But people are still able to remove their data from the interview sessions. Like if they want to remove their data, they still have a little bit of time to do that. So I'm not going to talk about that right now. Yeah, so that is my talk. I'm going to stop sharing because unfortunately I can't see anyone while I'm sharing. Great. Okay, I can see you all now. That's really exciting.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much.
So it was really quick, really amazing. And now it's small, but still time for questions. Any questions? If not, yeah, okay.
Sorry,
very nice.
I'm trying to coordinate typing and all. Kath, that was a really amazing project and so interesting. And I just wanted to get a better sense of the time frame when you might have mentioned it, but I might have missed it, like when you started it, and just such an interesting project in, you know, these pandemic times where we're so, you know, stuck on screen. And so just the time frame, and then also the feedback from participants, like what was the experience like for them?
Yeah, thank you so much for asking. So I started working on this project, kind of conceiving it several years ago. And then I had a plan that I really liked for thinking about, like, what am I going to do? I'm going to get people to build all these neurons together, and then we're going to put them in an installation, and they're going to control, it's going to be a neural network, and they're going to control the bits of it. And then COVID happened. And so I couldn't have people in a gallery, like, building things with me, which I'm very sad about. I still want to do that at some point. But so at that point, I was like, okay, I've got to kind of change my focus pretty significantly. And that one hadn't been intended to be the sort of ritual focused one. So I decided to kind of move the creation idea to a different project, keep the creation idea of creating movement this time, and then have it be doing this ritual sense, like doing it as a ritual. The movement is a ritual and you're creating your own. So I just started thinking about, oh, I better be doing this one in kind of like January. And then this project ran in July. So yeah, that was, and then for a while I was like, COVID just started, but maybe it'll be fine by the time I have to do this gallery installation. And no, it was not fine. Yeah, so that was the timeline. And I ended up really, so like sort of the sort of feedback that I got, not from the interviews, just because I'm not able to talk about that yet, but the feedback that I got just from people kind of participating, they really seemed to like have fun was a thing that I heard a lot, which was great and exciting. They also had a lot of conversations between each other, or sort of we would have these facilitated conversations. So they tended to be kind of like talking to all of us, and they would riff off each other's ideas, which I thought was fantastic and really interesting. And yeah, they also kind of said that going through the movement, and they had a lot of interesting feedback about like how they were thinking about it when they were working with other people. And one of them called it jamming in the kind of discussion that we had afterwards. And it was also really interesting that they did kind of talk about like, oh, I'm using this algorithm to like make my movement, and then this algorithm to kind of relate it to each other. Yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you very much, Kate. And now it's time to introduce our next speaker, Ganda Strautmane. Ganda is a PhD student at the Liepāja University, Department of New Media Art. It is in Latvia here. For the last 15 years, the artist has been working with art projects in the field of visual and haptic poetry. Ganda Strautmane taught in Art Academy of Latvia, and from 2021 she joined the Department of Art and Technology at the University of Latvia. Ganda, the floor now is yours.
Hello, thanks for introducing me, Solvita. Thanks for saving me for almost the end. I must say this is not healthy for one's nerves. Yeah, I would like to begin with the introduction and slide exhibition of my creative work and history of how I started to work with my artistic experiments with scripts. Because this is the title of this presentation, this is going to be a third of my presentation, and then with this background, I'm going to discuss some of my research aspects. Research is still in progress. So works of like-minded artists and speak about roots of textile codification art. In 2004, as a student of Art Academy of Latvia, fell in love with Braille code, and as a textile artist at that time, I started to employ Braille code in order to create artifacts perceivable for both the blind and people with eyesight. By drawing a thin thread between the black relief points and the white paper landscape, I constructed new meanings, and where textile compositions became texts, where ornament is a carrier of coded information. In the project Destruction, I played with the word destruction, whereas in others, I created lies like the ornaments using phrases from Catholic prayers. 2006, 2008 was the time when I started to work as an assistant in Riga-based organization, Electronic Texts and Textiles. Head of this organization was Joseph Tabby, an United States literary scholar and theorist, notable for his contributions to the fields of American literature and electronic literature, and Zane Berziņa. Since 2008, Zane Berziņa has become a professor for textile and surface design, conceptual development of materials and surface in the Art of Weissensee, Berlin, Germany. This was a life-changing moment in my life. ETT organized a series of presentations by its residents and invited international cultural workers, artists, designers, scientists, literates, researchers, and academics, all discussing different aspects of text and textiles. These presentation talks and workshops were helping to initiate and sustain dialogue between the local audiences and the invited specialists addressing the issues surrounding textual, visual, and material productions with our ever-changing technologies environments. This was a fruitful period in my artist life. In several years, I started to get bored by Braille laces art, and in 2016, I decided to work with my own scripts. This is what you can see on the screen right now. In beginning, I started with the Braille-like ornaments, still thinking about how could I later create my laces using these scripts. But on 2017, when I stayed in South Dublin Art Center in my artist residency, I started to explore local artifacts, both textual works of different famous poets and historical writing systems. I finished with a series of my own scripts inspired from medieval writing systems, and transcribed poems of Thomas Moore and Oscar Wilde, who is born in Dublin. After producing my artworks, this time with no textile laces, just simple prints, I started to notice that there is no exhibitions where I could exhibit my textual artwork. I felt an urge to find like-minded artists, and for my biggest surprise, I noticed that there are none. In order to find like-minded artists who work with text codifications as well, I found different groupings and subgroupings of visual artists working with text, one of them called visual poetry or concrete poetry. They were working with a written poem that created a visual image that relates to its meaning. A visual poem may use space between words and letters and breaks between lines and even alternative spellings of words to produce visual effects. I was disappointed because none of them invented their own script. They played with asemic writing. That asemic writing is a wordless, open, semantic form of writing. The word asemic means having no space, semantic content, or without the smallest unit of meaning. With that non-specified asemic writing, there comes a vacuum of meaning, which is left for the reader to fill in, interpret. None of these didn't match to my art, and I still didn't know how to answer someone who could ask me, what field of art are you, in what field of art are you working? When I started to research this area, I was really relieved when I found classification of invented languages by Albani and Buonoretti. This must be, sorry. Yeah, the classification of Albani and Buonoretti, this would be that one. They categorized imaginary languages, of which various subgroupings were identified, one of which included artist-invented languages. Here you can see there are also other subgroupings, like languages invented by mad writers, languages invented by mediums, and languages invented by alienated people, or even languages invented by children. And in this group, we can see the part marked with the red is the area where I'm interested in. So this classification actually encouraged me, and I decided that I must to give a name, or at least start to question like-minded artists about possibility to invent new terminology. This is how the term codification art came to me, actually. And I have started discussions with Latvian National Center of Language, and I was rather surprised that they helped me and suggested me some terminology in Latvian. Well, although I'm not very happy with their variations of terms, but at least they are working with me, and they are thinking also about these terms together with me. So this is on a video presentation, yes. So yeah, here you can see a bit closer this artistic language. Typically, imaginary languages are the creation of one individual. The difference between natural language and artificial language lies in the fact that the former does not have native speakers. This is, yeah, this one work is my latest work when I started to work work already with some applications, and yeah, I'm going to produce more apps like this in the future. So yes, well, I'm not the first one who is playing with the codes like this, and but I think probably we can play it one more time because it was quite a short. Yeah, and because this work is still ongoing, you could leave the comment actually. What do you think? Would you like to play the games like this in internet? What do you think about it? That would be helpful for my research, because there are some audience listening me now. Please, if it's not hard for you, leave some comment about what you think. Yeah, this is one of the works, and this summer I had also the possibility to work with some murals in Jēkabpils city. Here you can see one of them. This is my actually the newest work. I started to work with the codes also somewhere in the city. And yeah, the next project you will see here is from the previous summer. So it would be that, sorry. Oh, sorry. Yeah, this is a project from this summer. And I started to work with some projects in the city already last summer. So this the next sample would be from the last summer. Yeah, this one. This is the artwork you can see here. It survived 1 year already. As you can see, the greens started to cover it partly. And I also I spoke with some people who lived here in this area. I asked questioned them, of course, and I asked what they think about this artwork. For my surprise, they said that they very quickly figured it out, because here you can see I've made also some place where you can code the text. And for my surprise, the people said they coded the text, they could read what's written there, and that was interesting. If in the beginning I thought that people would be very skeptical, especially in countryside, so they were rather happy with artwork like this. Yeah, so I was speaking about the like-minded artists. I found some, not too many, but some I found through the Facebook. One of them is John Steepling, and he also works with his own alphabets. He's creating his alphabet. He sent me really lots and lots of his scripts. I'm here representing today only the one of them. And he have also lots and lots of wonderful artworks, and I'm really happy I met him. Another artist I haven't met in person, but I also found him in internet. Is it's going quickly there. I choose this video option because I've some videos included there, but somehow, yeah. The next artist is Ryan Ganda, with his typeface set in the stone, where he collection of the stones found by artists' children on beach near their family home. Yes, and this is also a very interesting project. I was really thrilled when I found this artist, and I'm really enjoying the scripts like this, and I'm enjoying possibility to see someone who is working in a similar way that I do. Must say that Ryan Ganda more works in other media and other styles. He works with sculpture and all possible medias. Yeah, and then the next one, I suppose, is going to be his, oh no, that's not this, no. Yeah, so research focuses especially on linguistic text codifications as a deliberate process inheriting certain visual artworks. And the next one is actually the book where the Ryan Ganda's typeface is used. And, the designer of this book is Calvinus, yeah, oh sorry. These are the Muller books where this actually script of Ryan Ganda's The Set of Stone is used, and this is also a wonderful book. I'm enjoying it very much. So, and the next, I suppose, is going to be the inspirations, where these inspirations comes from. Well, today we can see also all these types of barcodes and generators, and of course they are inspiring artists very much for new and new codifications. So the scripts are not the only one media where artists are encoding their texts, but also many of them are using the different scripts and barcodes. And of course, so the next slide is coming. And of course, we can be inspired from different languages that has been used in the world today. It's like Kilian, these are fictional languages, but also the languages who are actively used all around the world today. And inspirational, good inspiration we can find in history, like this one, lingua ignota from 12th century, is actually invented by Catholic nun, or the Voynich manuscript. Also both. The Voynich manuscript still stays uncoded. There are some ideas about what's written there, but they are still, we don't know what's written there. But the lingua ignota, of course, these are the Catholic prayers, and these are quite readable, and they are uncoded already. So I think I will finalize my presentation with, in the end, what can I say about all these works? And yeah, I hope there will be one day a possibility to give a name to all of these wonderful artworks that has been made by artist invented shipper and or script, and I hope the title will be Codification Art. Thank you very much for your attention, and sorry for me stopping the video all the time. Thanks.
Thank you, Gundaga. And one question for Gundaga. We are running out of time, of course, but still one question if you help. Stephanie and Case, you are just making applause. Yeah, okay, okay. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Happy you like it.
Yeah. Then thank you, Gundega. And now please welcome our last speaker, Ricardo del Fara. He's professor of electronic arts and music at Concordia University, Canada, and director of the Electronic Arts Research Center in Argentina. Ricardo is a composer and artist specialized in transdisciplinary actions with science and emergent technologies. And now, please, Ricardo, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I'm very happy. I hope you can hear me well. Yes, good. So I'm going to share my screen. Thank you so much for having me. Let's see if this is working well. Okay, you should see it now, right?
Yes.
Good. So I'm going to talk about collective experiences of extended reality and the project that's called Understanding Visual Music, or UVM. My name again, Ricardo del Fara, and let me start with a few quotes. This one is from Eleonora Stacchiotti, published in Digicult, about immersivity. As a result of our deepest human desires throughout media history, there is a persistent research to create a feeling of being present somewhere else. From the oldest panoramas and 3D to the most recent augmented and virtual reality, all media technologies committed themselves to the task of producing the sensation of being on the very spot, of being immersed somewhere different from reality. And then we have the well-known quote from Janet Murray from her book, Hamlet in the Holodeck. Immersion is a metaphorical term coming from the physical experience of being submerged in water. We seek the same feeling from a psychologically immersive experience that we do from a plunge in the ocean or swimming pool. The sensation of being surrounded by a completely other reality, as different as water is from air, that takes over all of our attention, our whole perceptual apparatus. And this has a lot to do with the things that are coming. Finally, coming back to Eleonora Stacchiotti, Janet Murray employed the adjective immersive in a metaphor to argue that those engaging in such experiences are not only sinking in another state, but are also affected in their consciousness. This metaphorical shift in meaning is not the only example of the growing correspondence of immersion with several other concepts, such as engagement, presence, flow, involvement, incorporation, absorption, or aesthetic illusion. Well, so let me go through a little bit of historical point, like Pierre Schaeffer and Pierre Henry in the 50s already working in space, trying to working with sounds in space, or Karl-Heinz Stockhausen doing the same in the 50s, working with different ways of moving sounds in space. In this case, for example, we can see this part of his score of Contacte and how he's moving sounds through different channels in the upper part of the score, and another page of Contacte. And if we go through history, we can see that this hasn't been starting in the last few decades, only coming from like in the 50s or 60s because of the electroacoustic music approach to our creation. But this is coming from many decades or centuries ago, the idea of involvement and the idea of sound distribution in space. Coming back to a few decades ago, this is coming from the Philips Pavilion, where, as you can remember, probably there was sound distribution over more than 300 speakers, and you could have like a lot of different perceptions, both because of the different kind of lights, the projections, the film projection, the slides, and even the sound projections that were flowing through different paths inside the building. This is also this is coming a few years after in the 60s, when the German pavilion in the Osaka Expo, I think it was 1970 if I'm right. And then we can see in the right photograph Karl-Heinz Stockhausen distributed sounds around this dome. And these are some of the drawings coming from that use of sound distribution in space. There are many other ways of approaching this. Like, for example, in this case, we can see like sound distribution, music distribution in a stage with different kind of sound, what we could call like a sound orchestra or a speaker's orchestra. The same, like we can go through many, many different approaches to these same kind of things, or even in this example, this is, for example, the sound trajectory that we can see, for example, the 4 speakers here and the sound trajectories that we can draw this for a piece of John Chowning, for his piece Turenas, also from the 70s in this case, and produced with a computer music sound system. So you can move sound in space, or you can be immersed in a certain kind of space. There are many different ways that we can approach this. And we have been studying these kind of things for a long time. And there are different ways of working with this. Like, I'm going to give a few of my own examples in exploring these kind of things, but also other kind of projects where we are working with pieces from other artists in trying to explore immersivity. In this case, this is a piece done with Isabelle Chouanière from Canada some years ago. And in this specific case, we were working with very limited resources, but we were trying to immerse the audience in a specific place. We were developing certain kind of specific kind of interfaces to move the sound in the space. And the whole structure was like, as you can see part here, I mean, you can see that this is part of a circle that we can see a little bit better here. The people, the dancers were in the center stage, in the center place, and we were surrounding the space with only 4 speakers plus 1 on the top. And we were trying to achieve immersivity in that case. It was not easy, but with a careful management of sound and the certain frequencies. It's not the same if you are using higher frequencies or lower frequencies in the way you can work with the immersivity and to feel as like a little bit almost overwhelmed by the surrounding sound. And what we were trying to do was that with this kind of system. And as I said, we were working with Isabelle Chouanière and also with 2 of my students from Concordia University, Karim Lakhdar and Kevin McDonald, in implementing this sound work. But let me jump to something different, like in this case, is a kind of sound dome that we have in one of the universities in Montreal. It's a dome with 32 speakers. We can see the arrangement here and the kind of distribution we have there. But to have a better idea, maybe it's good to see one of my colleagues showing the kind of dome that you can see here. This is a group of my students from Concordia University attending to the dome at UQAM University, part of the Hexagram network of art and science and technology in Montreal. So we were trying to explore immersivity using this 32 dome speaker system. So in my exploring of these kind of spaces, one of my own works in visual music, because we are going to link in a while visual music with immersive systems, I was doing this piece called Organic with different versions, stereo, 8 channels, 24 channels. So 24 channels means like the speaker orchestra we were talking before, but the 32 channels version we were, I'm mentioning here, was premiered in the full dome I was just showing a few minutes ago from the UQAM University in Canada. So there are many other systems like virtual mix rooms over headphones we can do immersivity in many, many different ways, or you can have a place like this with 148 audio channels. Like this is like not very usual that you can build something like this. But one very interesting approach is exploring immersive theaters. Like these are some ways or some shapes these kind of immersive theaters can take. So different ways where you can have full dome systems using both for the visuals and for the audio system, the immersive system. This is complex because there are many projection configurations. You can have 5 or 6 or 7 projectors, or 1, or even more than 7. So depending on the system and how to configure this kind of thing is very complex, and also moving pieces from one dome to another is extremely complex. So there are some standards, or there are, like, for example, IMMERSA, Immersive Media Entertainment Research Science and Art Association is trying to define file formats, but when you really move things from one planetarium or full dome theater to the other, it's not always easy to really make these like changes or movement from one place to the other. So in this case, I'm showing part of the file formats for the visual side, and also you have a number of formats that are being used for the audio. Again, you go to one place, they use only stereo, another place they use only 5.1, etc., etc. So this is a complex thing depending on where you go. And in this case, you have something from Hawaii, where you can see, for example, a 3D stereoscopic AK full dome technology, very complex, where you are mixing the dome and also with some kind of stereoscopic lenses, just to appreciate the depth of what these projections are being shown in the dome. So what is extended reality? Of course, you have different translations and definitions for this, but take this as XR is an umbrella term encapsulating augmented reality, virtual reality, and mixed reality, and everything in between. And finally, all immersive technologies extend the reality we experience by either blending the virtual and real worlds, or by creating a fully immersive experience. So let me show you one more project, and then we will go to full dome projects. So this is a project of, I was working with Luisa Guimarães and Rodolfo Julião in Brazil. And this is a kind of extended reality where you have an immersion, you are inside a certain place, but at the same time, you are using for part of it also like some kind of virtual reality lenses. And you can use one lens, or you can be just immersed in this space. And you can experience, as you can see, people with lenses or people without lenses. And it's a kind of immersivity where it's collective, and that's the whole point I want to address now. Again, the piece is by Luis Helena Guimarães, Rodolfo Julião, and myself. And finally, if we arrive to the kind of projects based on domes, like I'm going to show a few pictures from the planetarium in Jena, in Germany, that started in 1923, is the oldest planetarium still functioning, I mean, continuously running in the world. And these are a few photos I was taking in that planetarium, where I found something very special, like, for example, this audio system, because they have like 36 speakers on the horizontal level, 23 speakers on different levels, I mean, height levels, 1 speaker in the zenith, and 4 subwoofers, as for a total of 64 speakers and 32 audio channels. This is very unusual. This is very amazing, immersive audio and visual system. Just let me show you a few photographs that I took in Jena during the Full Dome Festival before I ran into understanding visual music. That is the project I have been running for the last 10 years. I started in Concordia University 10 years ago because I wanted to know more about visual music. So that's the name, Understanding Visual Music. that I was putting to the conference I was starting. So we started at Concordia University in Canada 10 years ago, running a first conference with a lot of works presented first in a conventional set, like rectangular set, but also with live visual music. Then in 2013, we started to work, in this case, Understanding Visual Music was held in Buenos Aires and in Argentina. And that year, we started to use the planetarium of Buenos Aires to run a number of pieces. It took a year of preparation until we were able to present this full concert. And until the last day before the concert, were all kind of technical problems. But it was great, finally, the day we were able to present this. And we have a lot of people coming to talk about visual music and about full dome works. Like in this case, like we have people from Canada, United States, Brazil, UK, Australia, etc., etc. So what happened? We also did, let me go to 2015 when we did the Understanding Visual Music in Brazil. And this was done at the University of Brasilia. We did the Understanding Visual Music Conference, and this is the Beijodromo and the center, the Brazil Bank Cultural Center, where we were presenting a number of pieces. So we were running these three conferences in Canada, Argentina, and Brazil, but this was taking the first concert in 2013 in Buenos Aires. This is the Planetarium of Buenos Aires, where we were presenting our first immersive systems that were really collective experiences. Because if we come back to the first quotes I was taking at the very beginning, the idea of immersivity, that we are psychologically, we're immersed in this system where we know that we are surrounded by other people. We can extend our hands, our arms, and touch other people at the same time. We are almost like full. Our mind is full of the sensations we are receiving because of these different visual music works, where we are mixing art, high technology, really, and in many cases, scientific, very interesting scientific approach. So I'm only showing some of the pictures I was taking myself during this first concert in Buenos Aires. And let me also tell you that out of this symposia that we were showing, we did a one full year full dome workshop with 15 groups that were selected among 50 that were applying to receive training to learn how to produce for full dome, for full domes. So these are some of the images done by the groups that were creating pieces for this full dome workshop. And we were also presenting concerts and lecturing in Germany, Colombia, Brazil, Mexico, Canada, Argentina, England, etc., etc. But let me, in my last 3-4 minutes, show you a couple of examples. This is coming of a group that came from Brazil to Argentina only to do the workshop. So they, after they learned to produce for full dome, they started to produce several pieces. These people from the Federal University of Santa Maria in Brazil and people from Durban University of Technology in South Africa, they were producing this piece that I'm going to play only a few seconds. And because we are short on time, of course, let me show you one more example. This is Ocular Illusion by two visual artists and Alain Thibault, a composer. So let me show you these two works I'm showing you here, of course, in a very limited set, is the kind of works we were showing in the Planetarium of Buenos Aires, where we have this kind of almost overwhelming approach where the people are very excited about receiving these visuals and in a really immersive system, but again, in a kind of collective immersive systems where you don't have time to process that you are really surrounded by a lot of people. You are immersed in the speed and quality and the intense flowing of images. So let me show you a little bit of ocular oscillation. Let's see. Just imagine that this is happening all around you. You are seated on the planetarium and you are receiving these images. I hope you could see it more or less well. And this is the kind of collective experiences we are managing with this Understanding Visual Music experience. And the next concert will be in less than 2 months at the end of November during the Electronic November Media Art Festival in Buenos Aires. And we are going to have again, the Understanding Visual Music concerts in the Planetarium of Buenos Aires. And in this year, we are going to have also we were showing different pieces from different artists from around the world, but also from the Jena, from the Fulda Festival that is running in a few days in Germany, from students from the Bauhaus University. So we hope also to present a few pieces online. Of course, it's not the same. What I'm talking about here is, of course, about the collective immersive experience of being in a planetarium, in a full dome setting, but we still want to have, mainly because of the pandemic, a few things running online. So just my last photos of some of the art and science work that we were showing in 2013. During the first Understanding Visual Music with in the Planetarium of Buenos Aires. And with these photos, I'm finishing my presentation. So thank you so much. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you, Ricardo, and thank you for our paldies in Latvian. It means thank you. Yes. And now it's time for one question. Susan, do you have a question?
Yeah, I do. Excuse me, I'm sitting here for too long. Hi, Ricardo. Thank you so much for performing that work for us and sharing it with us. So there's something that I'm really interested in. There's a lot of crosstalk between our projects, and one of them being this idea of how immersion in sound really challenges us perceptually. And I'm wondering, is this something that you find that quality interrupts our expectations or our narratives of time and space?
I'm not sure if I understood totally your question, but I mean, you mean if the sound itself is going to be like
yeah, the experience, right? The immersive experience, right? In these environments.
Yes, because one of the issues with this environment is that because the visuals are so strong, usually they take like most of the attention. So right. But when you go to places like in Jena, for example, where they have this system that is not really high quality in terms of visual, but then you have a huge amount of audio channels and settings for the different speakers. Yes, I mean, definitely the kind of things you can create. And when you cross the visuals with the sound and with such a number of channels, of course, you need to have the time of settings, because not what's the problem? Because you will need to have a residency in that planetarium to develop something specifically for that environment. If not, it's very difficult. But imagine the piece I was showing before, Turenas, for example, where you can have, the sounds flowing around and you have the visuals. I mean, it's amazing the perception and the sensation you can produce, because when you mix the visuals that is already almost taking your full attention. When you add to that the sound in a good environment, is really amazing. Is until you don't test this in an environment like full dome environment, it's like almost unbelievable. Just let me finish with this. Just when we did the first concert in the planetarium of Buenos Aires, until the day before, we didn't know what was going to happen, and we were working on that for a year. Yes, but there was so many people, and the people were so surprised, because you need to choose the exact pieces. It's not any piece that is going to work, but if you have the good pieces like ocular oscillation, it's overwhelming. Mm-hmm. So that together with the sounds is really like amazing. So you feel really like an immersive collective sensation that is like without glasses or without anything. So it's the traditional planetarium, just with the exact kind of you need to choose the kind of audiovisual pieces that are going to work well in that environment. But I don't know if I answered you.
Yeah, you did somewhat on the experience. And I would add to that, that I think what I'm hearing is that you're proposing this as like an experiential bonding agent, right? Like with the collective. And that's what I'm hearing from you right now, which is kind of awesome. So thank you.
Because the collective, I think the collective thing is the key point, because if not, it's the isolation, and we want to come back to meet with other people and to feel that we can do all this together. Hi, Rasa.
Hi, Ricardo. Okay, I think we are close to the end, right? So any more questions for Ricardo? Probably could have been, but yeah. So I already say goodbye to the other session.